Greetings, viewing audience. I'm Vince Solis, president of Brazosport College. Today we have a really, really great treat for everybody that is watching this podcast. Today I am pleased to share with you the experiences and present to the viewing audience two of my personal heroes that I've not only worked with, but I consider them mentors and guides in this journey we call leadership. Today with us on the show, we have Dr. Juliet Garcia. I'll talk a little bit about her bio in just a bit, and Dr. William Strong. Worked with them in Brownsville and with the UT system, but lots of amazing stories that we're going to share and talk about. And I'm going to kind of get started with a little bit about each of you because you have amazing bios and you've accomplished so much. So Dr. Garcia, in your instance, your bio reads like a who's who of higher ed leadership and leadership. So as I recall, Forbes magazine, top 50 greatest leaders in the world, sandwiched somewhere between the Pope and President Obama. What an accomplishment. I was, wow. I would always tell people, that's my boss right there. So, but you were also Times Magazine's top 10 greatest presidents in the country. So what an accomplishment. You were, I guess, one of the youngest and the first female Hispanic president of a college. 22 years at the University of Texas Brownsville. I'm not sure how you survived that long in terms of it's such a difficult job, but I want to talk about that. But you've had such a storied career in leadership, and then recently culminating with the Presidential Medal of Freedom that was awarded to you by President Biden for your contributions, lifetime contributions to education. Welcome to the show, Dr. Garcia.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to see you again, be with you, and get to taste of what you're doing and what you've done.
We're excited to have you.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you, Dr. Garcia. I can't tell you how happy we are to have you here.
Thank you.
And then with Dr. Strong. So Dr. Strong, communications expert, #1 bestseller on Amazon with all things Texas. So I know that you've got an expertise in storytelling. So I know communication is obviously a big part of what we do in higher ed and in leadership. But for the viewing audience, also a Fulbright scholar. So for those of you that may not know, the best way to describe a Fulbright scholar is that if higher education was an Olympic sport, Dr. Strong has a gold medal in higher education. We were just talking about this earlier, and being a Fulbright scholar is not only knowing your craft really, really well, but you can also explain it in such a way that education is part of that mission of becoming a Fulbright scholar. So we are excited to have you both on campus. I know that you're going to be visiting for a couple of days and meeting with our folks. But for today's podcast, we're going to talk about leadership. And we talked a little bit about this as this is kind of our year's topic. And it's so important that, I think more than ever, the world needs leaders, right? But it's a nebulous concept. When you're in the throes of it, what does it mean? What are the ups? What are the downs? So we're going to talk about all those. But I got a question for both of you because you've had such storied careers. I'm sure your definition of leadership has evolved over your expansive careers. How do you define leadership, Dr. Garcia?
I think the kind of overwhelming sense of being in charge of something is the trust, the public's trust that you have been given, not forever, but for as long as you have. And that trust is a great responsibility. It's a privilege first. Imagine trusting your child to a teacher or your husband to a physician in surgery. So people have given us their money and their children or their spouses or themselves and said, see what you can do with this kind of raw goods. I trust you will make things better for them in their lives. So when someone chooses you for a leadership position, it is profound. And it is, for me, it was from the first day. And I thought, all right, then I will do what I can to accept the trust and then do the best I could honorably with that. So I think it has to do with the trust. The other part of it is the common good. I don't think any one of us in community college world of leadership or university, especially public universities, I don't think any of us are confused about our mission. And for me, the mission has always been to do good work in the public arena. So it's not just return on revenues for stockholders or shareholders. For for us, it's much bigger and much more important. And that is to take the trust that you've been given, the power that comes with that, to make decisions in someone's money to use. And that's to create a world that was better off after you touched it than before. So you're given gifts. All of us are given gifts in life. And you're entrusted with those gifts for the public good, for yourself too, for the
Yeah.
better jobs you're going to get, better home that you can create for your own family, but also for others. So if you combine those two kind of publicness of the job, I think that's the most um, um, it's the hardest part of it. And if you keep focused on that, so you've been given this as a privilege, and we've trusted you, so produce something that's much better off after you've touched
Yeah.
it than before.
Yeah, what a way to articulate it, Dr. Garcia. It's that the idea that you're being entrusted with this, to your point, this profound responsibility. And there's this idea in higher education: what's the cathedral that we show up to build, right? What is your work about that day? But really interesting perspectives on the trust that people place in us to do not just good things, but also, I think, and we'll talk about this as well, is there are times that leaders fail, in their loss of either integrity or their focus, their purpose, their mission, their internal values. So we'll talk about some of those things as well, because leadership can be difficult, and we see it all the time where there are some that do it really, really well, and we admire and respect, and then others will have some moments of challenge. So really great perspective on that, Dr. Garcia. Dr. Strong, same question to you. Everybody's got a little bit different perspective. So how do you define leadership?
Courage. You have to have a lot of courage to do the right thing. Hard to do the right thing.
Yeah.
But actually, I learned most of what I know about leadership from Dr. Garcia, because I was a vice president under her for 5 years, and I always said that was the best graduate seminar in leadership I ever had was to sit at the executive council with her and to see how one acts with courage, how someone, as she said, takes on the responsibility of not just running the institution for now, but to hand it off to the next generation in better shape so that it can grow and do better things in the future. Now, I was the vice president for, they said I was the vice president for new money. My job was to bring money to build the endowments and all that. And I've always been impressed with what Benjamin Franklin said about the power of endowments, the power of compound interest, he said, which was the greatest power in the universe.
Yeah.
He said, because your money makes money, and the money that you make, the money that your money makes money. And so over time, it's a magic. It's a kind of magic in what it can return. And I saw in that position that my job as a leader was to build those endowments so that the next generation would have better opportunities and better empowerment through financing to see their dreams come true or pursue those dreams. So that was one of the things I learned, from Dr. Garcia. And I'm also a classicist. I studied Greco-Roman history and literature. And Aristotle said that ethos, which is credibility and a big part of leadership, is about good character, good sense, and goodwill. So you want to be a person, obviously, of good moral standing. You want to have intelligence in your decisions, and you want to, as she said, consider the people, that you're working for the people, the community, to build a better place for everyone. So that's a good take, I think.
Dr. Strong, you said a couple of things that really ring some bells for me. The ethos part, one of the things, we just got through with a year-long process of completing our strategic plan. Mm-hmm. And strategic plans, they can be difficult because things have become so complex in the space that we operate in. It used to be, well, let's do a strategic plan for 10 years. Mm-hmm. And then it became 8, then it became 5, and now it's 3 with pit stops every semester and trying to adjust each of the course corrections with the data. But one of the things that we built into it, and we're just about to complete it, is the bookend, right? So we've got our mission, our vision, our core values, and the goals, right? That kind of sets the stage for everything and ours is we elevate the lives by the work that we do. That we condensed our mission statement into elevating the lives of the people that we serve so that their lives are better through our work. But on the back end, the second part of that is it's our ethos document. We're about to complete that. And it's really to your point, what do we believe in? What drives our work? It's not just about the work that you, but why are you doing the work why are you putting in the 50, 60 hours a week? And it really goes back to that first part. If we can make lives better for others, that's our purpose right there. And I think the other thing that you said, and Dr. Garcia, being in a student of the game working under you, I often tell people that I work with, I said, it's hard to describe what that was like when you're dealing with someone that was that good at what they did. So I know that Dr. Strong, because he sat on the executive cabinet, he was in that classroom all the time. But for us, we were in there when we could, right, in executive council, at other meetings, and it was a privilege to sit and learn. And I was listening, Dr. Garcia. I can assure you that there were many times that I listened to just some of the analogies that you use, some of the leadership lessons. It was, to Dr. Strong points, the best classroom ever for that space, because you watch somebody who was really, really exceptional at it, and then you got to kind of process it and work it into your area. But there was a part to this, Dr. Is the mentoring, right? So we were beneficiaries of working for you. Who were mentors that helped get you to where you're at? So much of being a good leader is understanding how to not only lead but also be led. I think I think it was you who said something about, to the effect of, in leadership you got to be a good soldier and a good general, right? And knowing when to switch those roles. But who are some people that helped shape your life?
Well, I think my mother and my father. I mean, you have to go all the way to that origin, because both mother and dad had high school degrees. Both of them were very good students. Mother was a salutatorian of her high school graduating class in Harlingen, Texas, which was a tough thing, because to be a Mexicana in Harlingen in those days meant that the public swimming pool was available only to you one day a year, and the next day they cleaned out the pool. They drained it and cleaned it out.
Wow.
So in that environment, she was the one Hispanic girl that made it into the honors program at Harlingen High School and graduated salutatorian. And the story that my father told was, your mother should have been valedictorian. She missed it by a fraction of a point, because there was no way a Mexicana was going to be named valedictorian. But Dad was a little embittered by it. But Mother was never bitter. And what she said was, this is the world that we live in. You can't redo, you can't design the whole world. So you got to know what you're walking into, and you have to be twice as prepared as anyone else. In 2 languages, she said. So we had to keep my father's Spanish and learn my mother's English. And if you can do that, and if you can be smarter than everybody else in the class, and you can do it in 2 languages, it doesn't matter what you look like, what your name is, whatever. So instead of beating you up, they strengthened us. They said, here's the pathway. Now, Mother and Dad never got to go to college. And that was the saddest part of the story for us, because they graduated from high school during the Great Depression. And there was just no money. There was barely money to keep food on the table. So they saw many people from Brownsville, both having grown up in the Rio Grande Valley, Dad in Brownsville, Mother in Harlingen, of their friends go away to school. And years later, after they hadn't been able to do that themselves, my father would say, you see that guy over there who is now the mayor of the city, or you see that guy who's now a pediatrician? He'd say, I got better grades than he did in geometry. He'd say it very quietly, not in a boisterous way, but he knew he could have done it had he had the opportunity. So our parents made sure we knew that the path for us was college. And we didn't know what college was, but we knew it was so important that Dad started a savings account, $5 a month for each one of us. There were 3 of us in the family, so that we would have money to go to college. We didn't know how much it cost or what it was going to be, what we were going to do when we got there. But it must be something really important. So I got those opportunities. But a lot of people in our community, when we started our work at Texas Southmost, still were in the same place my mother and father had been. They were not mobile. If they didn't get it in Brownsville, they weren't going to get it at all. They worked long hours, so sometimes we offered as many night classes as day classes, and we did everything to try and accommodate that next generation that had pent up demand for higher education, generational pent up demand, and was growing faster than the state of Texas.
Yeah.
We had no choice. There was no time to slow it down. I mean, who would we be? Who were we to define your destiny by, well, I'm tired this year, I think I'll take it easy.
Yeah.
We were always in a race to meet the pent-up demand and to build opportunity for the next generation. I didn't want what happened to my mother and father ever be the reason people in the Valley were not able to get an education.
You gave a speech once, Dr. Garcia, and I don't know if you're going to remember this, but I do. Like I said, I listened, Doc. I was a good student, even though you I was in the back, but you talked about, there was a time that you were working, we were following your vision, and you were talking about that the institution was the light that lit the darkness, right? That if we could get people to our doors, if we could get people to education, if we removed the barriers, then those individuals that got there would have better lives because of the work that we did. And I remember distinctly the analogy. It says, this is the place that lights the darkness, right? Because we were dealing with, you were talking at the time about on your way to campus, there were tire shops that sold used tires.
Yes.
And I'll never forget that you said, who puts their babies on $5 tires when they're the most precious thing that you have? But if you have nothing else, you're going to buy $5 tires. Our job is to change that. You could have heard a pin drop in that room when you said that, right? And I think that those analogies and having someone to guide that path to that question of mentoring is just so important, right? Somebody needs to be the push, be the shepherd, be the guide to help light that path so that lives can be different. There was another gentleman on your cabinet, Dr. Garcia, Dr. Tony Zabaleta. I considered him a mentor, and I'll never forget. I was dealing with a real difficult situation, and he's got this big, deep voice, kind of like you, Dr. Strong, and he says, "What's going on?" Right? And I said, "Doctor," and so I'm pouring my heart out to him. I said,
Good friend of
Dr.
Dr.
Z,
Strong.
yes, Dr. Zabaleta. So I'm pouring my heart out to him, and I'm just like, I'm having these issues, and he's like, he starts laughing. He starts laughing with that deep voice that only he can, and I was devastated because he was, I considered him a mentor just like you, Dr. Strong, and Dr. Garcia. But then he says something real funny. He goes, "Well, it's better you than me, right? Because we need to share the load on having the duct tape, right?" So I'm like, Dr. Salet, I'm pouring my heart out to you. But then he said this, and I will never forget this. He says, "Vince," he says, "this is nothing." He says, "This is a difficult day." He says, "But ships go out into the harbor and they come back in and you're going to be fine." But then he said this, he says, "One day you're going to look back on this and you're going to laugh and you're going to realize that you got through it." And I said, "Okay." I said, "You know what, Doc, you are absolutely right." And then he, patted me on the back. He goes, "All right, go get him," But I never forget that because I pour myself out to you. Like I said, I really admired him to this day. And he's laughing. He goes, "Don't worry about it." His whole message was, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. You're going to be just fine. You're going to get through this. And but he did say, he goes, "Well, it's better you than me," right? He goes, "I'm tired of beating in the paper and all those." But he was right.
So let me respond to the other part of your question about who were my mentors.
Yeah.
I mentioned my mother and father, but every one of us probably would look at our parents first. So
Sure.
in different circumstances, but about impact the same. But I also was very lucky to have several women in my career that taught me, the way I say it is that they let me borrow their courage before I grew my own.
Okay.
Because I didn't know you could be risky. I was very studious, and if I didn't have an A average, I would just study harder. It was all up to me. I just stay up and study a little bit harder. I didn't realize the power that comes from having all three of us aiming in the same direction. And I learned from people that it was harder work to get three people to move in the same direction than one. But if you were going to do the big stuff, if you wanted to do the real hard stuff that was beyond your own career, your own good, then public good required the public. And that was new territory for me. And so that takes you out of the classroom and all the little graduate seminars that you study and all the Greeks and Romans that you study for rhetoric. It took you right into it. So I could teach it, but I wondered if I could do it. Could I persuade, right? Because we had learned the theory of of how to persuade ethos, pathos, and logos.
Yeah.
But can you really do it when it counts? When you're passing a bond issue, or when
Yes.
you're being sued for something that you think is wrong and you
Yes.
have to stand up and take a different path. I learned from a lady named Jean Eckhoff,
Yes.
who was at one point a elementary school teacher, then a principal of an elementary school, then became a teacher at the college, then became a trustee at the college. And then we encouraged her to run to be a trustee, and she did. And then was recruiting people to sit on the board with her. So she was slowly amassing a group because the work that she had to do was bigger than herself. Then she recruited Mary Rose Cardenas.
Remember
Mary
her
Rose
vividly.
Cardenas, a businesswoman who herself never graduated from college. All
She
her
was an
5
amazing
children
business
did.
lady. Yes, she was amazing.
But she and her husband had one of the largest Hispanic-owned businesses in the United States of America, and they had built it from a little filling station in downtown Brownsville. He decided to sell used cars on the corner of his own filling station because he see the money was better than making a penny off of the gasoline.
Right.
And so pretty soon he's in the car business. When they retired, they had over 13 different franchises. She knew she was courageous. She didn't have credentials. She didn't need them. She knew that that a PhD next to your name didn't give you credibility. It didn't give you strength. She didn't need the titles that sometimes we think you have to have.
Mhm.
She knew
Yeah.
what was right, and she was ethical, and she could call you down because she was clean. So you better be clean too.
She had a presence about her.
She
that
had, I mean, unbelievable.
was. Yeah.
We had a trustee one time run for office and he's coming on and he's talking to the other trustees, including Mrs. Cardenas, and he says, "Well, boys, what are the perks for this new job?"
Oh.
And she turned around and flipped around and she said, "There are no perks in
Yeah.
this job. They have trusted us with it." And he got the lecture of a lifetime. Never asked for the perks
That's
again.
it. Yeah.
But so not only did she act courageously, she held others to that too. And then she taught others and recruited others. I mean, she recruited people to run for our board, not because they were political. They weren't. They were a cardiologist or a nurse or a teacher or a lawyer or a DA. I mean, the federal prosecutor's office. They didn't even know that we had elections until she gathered them up. So I guess the biggest lesson from Mrs. Cardenas, you could say, is courage. But it was much more than that. It was taking courage to do the big work, and knowing that you had a moment to do this in. And shame on you if you didn't take advantage of it, now that you have been given the trust and the responsibility to do it. So she would call me up during the day and she'd say, "Tell me what you're doing," which meant, tell me a story of what's going on. So I'd say, well, a student had a problem or whatever it was. And she'd say, "Okay, bye." And she'd hang up. She needed to be, she said that I fed her. She said, "Doing business is great, but the work you all are doing at the college, that's powerful.
Yeah.
And it feeds the soul."
Yeah.
So she was able to gather up other good people like herself. So I borrowed her courage in the sense that I saw her take shots at people and survive. I didn't know you could do that. I thought, they're going to kill you if you take a shot at them.
Yeah.
As long as you know what you're fighting for, you can't be intimidated because you're doing it for the right reason. You don't want the bigger salary. You don't want the bigger position. That's not why you're doing it. So there's nothing they can do to you. You speak the truth, your own truth. Of the
She was the best way to describe her, because I would only admire her from afar because I didn't have obviously the kind of the relationship you had with her. But watching her in action, she was the best way to describe her. She was a giant. She
was 5 foot tall.
Yeah, she was tiny, but she had this presence about her that she would strike fear in us, and not in a bad way. In a way of you got on board with what it is that she was going to be, because she was amazing. You could watch her from afar, and you could tell she was tiny, but she would walk in there, and holy cow, she was loaded for bear, so to speak. Yeah, she was very impressive.
Well, tell him about her encounter with Hans Mark.
When we were talking about bringing the University of Texas to Brownsville, I mean, who were we to think that we could take on the University of Texas system? she said, when you are, you need shade from the sun, you find the biggest tree to give
Yeah.
you shade. And who's the biggest tree? Who'll get it? And I said, well, UT System. She goes, that's who we're going after. So we called. I mean, who were we to call UT System? They didn't know where we were, what Brownsville was, and who we were. And at any rate, the shortest version is we got the chancellor to come down. Our senator was used to help get the chancellor to come down and meet with us. And the ask was going to be to start a new university in Brownsville, a new branch, an autonomous branch of the University of Texas system. And I remember telling my husband that night, he said, well, how was your day? And I said, we're going to start a new university. He said, what's for dinner? It's like, wait a minute, come on down here. What are you thinking? Because it was just so out of reach. And no, you just tell me what we're going to have for dinner first.
Big idea.
So it was a huge idea.
Yeah.
So we got Hans to come down. We didn't know him. He was a PhD in physics. His father had been one of the originators of polymer chemistry. He had run one of the labs in California. He had been the assistant director of NASA. I mean, the guy was just
Uber
was
credentialed,
brilliant.
yeah.
And he was 6 foot, no sé qué. He was tall, and here was Mrs. Cardenas, 5 foot. And Mary was primed. I had given her a lot of information. She knew it backwards and forwards. And so we had a little small private meeting, and in South Building, in the little faculty area that we had set up there. And she just tore in. And this is why we need you here. This is part of Texas, in case you hadn't noticed. She didn't say it that way, but pretty much so. We've had pent-up demand, and we're going faster than the state. And shame on University of Texas for us having to ask you. You should have been knocking on our door, And he's looking at her like, and who are you?
Yeah.
And so she finished with her spiel, and it was perfectly done. And she sat on the edge of her chair the whole time. I mean, just like in his face. And he's sitting on the little settee, little couch, and he's like got his arms, He's owning the space, and she doesn't care. She's on the edge of her chair, and she finishes, and she says, "So when are you going to commit to starting a university in Brownsville?" And he said, "Well, Mrs. Cardenas," and I thought, "Oh no, he's pronouncing her name wrong. This is not good." And he said, "Well, Mrs. Cardenas, in about 20 or 30 years, I think we will be able to." And I thought it was going to be an explosion. She never sat back, and she said, "We do not have the luxury to wait 10 years or 5 years, much less 20 or 30. So if you're not going to make a deal with us, just let me know, because we're talking to A&M also." And I thought, oh my God, are we talking to A&M? I didn't know we were talking to A&M, but I was stoic.
Yeah.
And he looked back at her. And then at this point, there were just 5 of us or 6 of us in the room. All of us were waiting for the Titans to clash and it to be over. And he was so taken by her energy and her forthrightness. He kind of leans back and he said, "You're absolutely right. We don't have the luxury either to wait that long. Would you all put something together and then call Mrs. Cardenas and I next time, the couple of months, and tell us what your plan is?" I mean, it happened like that fast. Why did that happen? When you hear Hans tell the story later on, he told the story over and over. He came to our first commencement and told the story to everybody, because he also had been profoundly impacted by Mary Rose Cardenas. So she taught me by her own person and her own testament how to have courage. After I learned, then of course, once you have your own, then you can run as she did. But we all are lent lessons, and the more, and as you watch them, you feel them, you learn them, and then you borrow them and make them your own.
Yeah, it's an amazing time to be a part of that whole experience. Yeah, Dr. Strong, what about you? Who served as a mentor in your role?
She did.
Dr. Garcia, yeah.
But to go back further than that, one of the things that taught me a lot about leadership and courage was when I was young. I worked I was a pharmaceutical salesman for Wyeth Labs. I sold drugs legally
Yeah.
I was a hospital rep. I went to the hospitals and detailed doctors on new drugs and new applications of drugs. It's an interesting sales job because you don't actually sell anything. You don't actually say, give me a check. You just try to influence their prescribing habits, their patterns, and that's how you are successful. But anyway, it was in that job that I learned kind of what she's talking about with Mary Rose. I learned audacity to ask for the business, to be clear about I remember one of the first times I was detailing a doctor with my regional manager, and I was laying out all the studies that Harvard had done on this medicine and why it was clear that it was a much better choice than choice X because we had all the data. So I was using the evidence-based argument, right?
Yeah.
And then my regional manager said to the doctor, he said, well, I think Dr. Strong has done a great deal of telling you about the drug, but I don't think we've done any business today. He said, because he never asked you to use the medicine. And so he told me, I don't care how bright they are, how smart they are, you can't leave it to them to make the conclusion. He said, you got to ask them, say, given this profile, will you use this medicine on the next 5 people who come in who fit the profile? Will you try it? And sit back and the next person who speaks loses,
Yeah.
And so to ask for the business is part of the magic of being successful in persuasion on the front lines of influence. Like Dr. Garcia said, I was curious. I already had a PhD. I wanted to go work on the front lines of influence to see if what I had learned in Greco-Roman rhetoric and all of that was applicable in the real world, and it is.
Yeah.
But it has to be forthright, and it has to be translated into a form where the person you're selling has clarity on what you're asking them. And my regional manager told me once, I asked him what makes for the most effective pharmaceutical rep. He said, the person with the right story for the right doctor at the right time. And that's where I first began realizing the power of stories and influence, not long drawn out stories, but anecdotal stories, useful stories, human stories. And then when I came to work with Dr. Garcia, I saw her magic in using stories
Yeah.
to influence, to persuade, to rally the troops, to keep the institution in line, to sell the institution. And so when I went out to talk to foundations and things, I learned from her that I needed a good story to help them understand our work. And that was one of her terms, our work. Understand our mission in life and get them to be a part of it and to care about it the way Hans Mark did, that they become a disciple of, your own mission.
So let me ask this of both of you, because you're both experts in communication. This is what you, in addition to everything else that you've done in your careers, you both have technical training in communication, persuasion, speaking. What are the frameworks for the viewing audience that's out there, Dr. Garcia and Dr. Strong? If you could talk to your younger self about communication and developing these communication skills, I mean, you can't do the work of leadership without being able to convey not just an idea, but why it's important. If you could talk to a younger version of yourself, what advice do you have for up and coming leaders or people that want to study the craft, learn the craft, be involved? They've got goals. Communication is such a big part of it, and there's storytelling, there's the influence, there's the persuasion, there's so many things that come with it. But what advice do you have on the frameworks for how you communicate effectively? Because you're both masters at it. You guys have, I've watched both of you in action, and you walk away, okay, who are we going to go fight next, right? Like you couldn't help but want to, which dragon is next for us to slay, right? Let's go do it. But how do you get to that point, right? So what advice do you have for people that may be uncomfortable in that space? And I had a boss tell me, he says, do it as often as you can. Just do it. Just practice. Just get out there. He goes, you're going to learn some things. And, he gave me some other feedback. This was before I went to Brownsville. And he would just say, just go get involved and get in front of groups. And that worked, but it works for a little bit, right? Because then you're stumbling and you run into people like yourselves that are experts at it and do it so well. What advice do you have, Dr. Garcia and Dr. Strong, on storytelling, on persuasion, on communication?
I think what what I learned, and you learn by doing and making mistakes, because sometimes it didn't work, right? I mean, it sounds like it worked all the time. Well,
Right.
It didn't. And I testified before committees at the state level or at the federal level, and I didn't move them. I couldn't budge them. I couldn't get the law changed. I couldn't get the money allocated. And I'd come home, and that was a long trip back to Brownsville, that I didn't get the building, or I didn't get the money or I didn't get into the permanent university fund, whatever it was, didn't get the new degree program. I mean, I had a lot of times when it didn't work. So that's going to happen to all of us. And I don't know if I could have said it better. That would have made a difference. I don't know if it was my style, speaking style, or evidence or lack of that changed it. Sometimes it was the audience that did it. But here's what I know. What I know that did work. When I was able to make something happen big, change the nature of what our work was, it was because I wasn't the only one who was a believer at that point. So Mary rose to Hans Mark. Hans became a believer. He figured, this lady's not going to get off my neck until I do something. He bought into it. If I have a great dream about something, but faculty don't want to participate in it, I have nothing. If a board doesn't want you to move in that direction, menos. I mean, much less probability of winning the argument. So you're always, and I use David and Goliath stories a lot because we're always a David. We always seem to be the David, right? And there's always a Goliath. There's always a new dragon to slay. And so our job is to tell a compelling story that illuminates, that drives Goliath away, that helps us win the moment. And when I would go back to places that I had spoken in before, they would ask me, for example, how's that chess team doing?
Yeah.
Or how are those physics guys doing? Because they remembered that. They didn't remember the statistics that I had used, and they didn't care about how big our campus was and how beautiful our buildings were and the credentials of our faculty. They wanted to hear about the young man that played. Remember the young man that our engineering students helped play the piano? He had no legs. He had lost his legs as a child, and engineering students helped him by devising a way that with something in his mouth, pressing it controlled with Radio Shack machinery that they put together. He could control the pedals because he wanted to play Chopin. And for playing Chopin, you need to use the pedals. And he had no legs. And when he had discovered that, he was very sad. His professor in music called up our professor in engineering. He said, I need a little miracle here. You got any engineering guys that might take this on? He had 5 young men, freshmen, engineering students. And they took it on. And for 4 years while they were there, they worked and they worked and they worked. Became very good friends with the young men in the music theater. And then we went to hear him in the Arts Center play Chopin using this contraption that the boys had devised from Radio Shack parts. So how does that happen? It happens because that music professor cared as much as I cared, or as much as Cardenas cared, about making a difference in that young man's life. Or the professor in engineering, who said, I'll give you 5 of my students. So it's a real story. It's how in churches they have, what is the moment when you go up to testify and witness? And we all witnessed it. I saw that young man perform on our stage in our arts center. And there wasn't a dry eye in the house by the time. It was a standing ovation. He was a star at that moment. He became a teacher himself. So it just takes a couple of moments like that where you invite people on the journey with you. It can't be your journey only.
You can't.
It just, not if you're going to do big stuff. You're going to win the day, and I mean in a big way. You've got to have an army. So the short version of the end of that is, when I was named the recipient of the Medal of Freedom, which was very humbling, of course, what the biggest return I got was not the medal, although it's very beautiful. No, it was not the trip to Washington with my family. It was what people said when I got back. and they said, "We did it." We, plural pronoun. And I remember the first time I heard it, and I thought, it worked. We did it. They felt that we had been recognized, not me. I just happened to be the person standing there, but they appreciated our work. They got it. And so turning your work into we is powerful. And it doesn't diminish your power. Quite the opposite. It gives you the army that you need. And I'll have to think of a better, I don't want to use army as an analogy, but it does. It gives you the soldiers you need to march into battle again one more time. So that poder is real.
And I think to your point, Doctor, if you're going to do really big things, you cannot do this work by yourself. You can't. It's impossible. And it doesn't matter. There are a lot of talented individuals. We all know them, but you can be the Tom Brady of higher education, and it will do you no good if you're even the Juliet Garcia of higher education. If you don't have the people like Dr. Strong and Dr. Zavaleta and Ms. Cardenas and all the people that support it, more people are always going to be able to accomplish much bigger, better things for communities.
I had our provost, Dr. Jose Martin, Cuban,
Great guy.
Born, came over during the Peter Pan, the Pedro Pan exit when they sent so many young men out of Cuba, raised here in the United States, became a nuclear engineer,
Yep.
wanted to go to architecture school, never was able to fulfill that part of his dream, but had a tremendous sense of architecture. So I end up with Dr. Martin as our dean of science, and then vice president, and then our provost. And Jose could tell when a building was wrong, when the arch wasn't right on a building. And so we'd be walking through the job site one afternoon, the dust blowing, and in front of main building when it was no boulevard there, it was no grass. And the dust is blowing, and he goes, "It's not working. It's not working." I said, "What's not working?" He says, "The arch. It's not right." And I said, "Oh, no." So you can't, how can it not be right? What's wrong with it? He goes, I don't know, but it's not working.
He felt it. Yeah.
And he felt, he could tell. And what we learned was about the Greeks and Roman arches have a certain proportionality. So the width of a column has to be of a certain relationship to the arch that sits on top of it. So you see some buildings and they try to make it look right, but the arch is wrong. It's too little or too big or it's too pointy because they did not find, and they're well-defined dimensions. So this did not have that dimensionality, and he could feel it. He couldn't describe it yet. So anyway, the bricklayer is there, the mason, and he hears us talking in Spanish, and he comes over and he says, "Se lo arreglo. Can I fix it for you?"
Fix it for you.
And so I said, "Yes, go ahead, please, because I have this man here dying." And so he went over there and he said, "Let me just try this." And he widened the column. And now it could withstand the big arch on top of it elegantly. And Jose says, "Okay,
Now it's good.
it's
Very
good."
good.
How do you, so I didn't hire Jose for that reason,
No.
right?
Yeah,
He was
the
a
talent.
scientist. He started our physics program. He helped us build a biomedical research field with Dr. Colom and
Yes.
Dr. Diaz in the physics field. He attracted other people like him. So what happens when you get a real thoroughbred is you get everyone who comes to work with them too.
Let them run.
And that's very valuable.
Dr. I'll tell you a quick story about Dr. Martin that you may not know. One time, I don't know how we ended up doing this, but we were playing board games. And we all got to pick who was going to be our partner, because you could pick one partner, and it was kind of like a charades kind of.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I drew first round. So I said, I got Dr. Martin, right? I was the smartest guy in the room,
Smart
right? So, it's me and Dr. Martin against, Jay and Stockton. It was a bunch of other people. So I said, we got this. I've got a nuclear physicist on my team. I said, we are going to destroy. Yep. Well, it was charades, right? His presentation of the clues was so complicated. I remember on one of them, he says the word was cow. Literally, he goes, this is an ungulate. And then we're all looking around like he's like, I said, oh no, I realized very quickly this was not. We ended up in last place. We had a great time, but he was just so far out there in terms of his just being smart. But to your point, if you bring really talented, smart people to your work, it expands your bandwidth, right? Just as a team. So I think that's a
Great
really
way to put that.
Yeah.
Expands your bandwidth. I like it.
Dr. Sean, let me ask you this on the communication piece. So you're an expert not just in the communication piece, but also in storytelling. Why is that so important in leadership?
Well, storytelling is important in leadership because it conveys the humanity of your goals. It helps people feel it. I mean, look at Jesus. He taught in parables, which are stories that have obviously powerful points to them that stay with you. If he didn't teach in parables, we probably wouldn't have so many churches today, because obviously that kept the gospel alive and living in people. Because if you ask most people, they don't know a lot of scriptures, but they know the stories.
They know the stories.
They know the Good Samaritan. They know that, and it carries a moral within it. So it helps guide your life behavior, etc. So and we are homo narrans. We human beings. We are homo sapiens, but at the core, we are storytellers. I mean, if you look at the oldest caves, people were drawing. They were telling stories, about the hunt or whatever they could manage to depict. But it was a depiction of their life, and no doubt that life was also told orally, as well as their ability or their efforts to try to express it on the cave walls. So we have this need to tell our story every day. I mean, I'm sure you've told stories other than right here, but you've told stories today. You don't just provide data, you put it in a story form because it makes it more powerful, memorable, and impactful. And that's why I got into, because Texas is a land of stories. Our whole mythology is carried in the tall tales and things of Texas history. And so I wanted to kind of collect those stories. That's why in my book I say these are stories from Texas. Some of them are true because we have this habit of exaggerating, and it's natural for folklore and things to exaggerate. But one of the ways that Texas was sold, so to speak, to the eastern seaboard that made it exciting and interesting and fascinating is everything was bigger in Texas. You used to, way back in the 1800s, they had postcards of cowboys riding jackrabbits, with the jackrabbits being huge. They're kind of an early AI, putting the cowboy on the rabbit. And they mailed these postcards of people from Texas mail and say, y'all ought to come over here and see these rabbits. And so this tall taleness of things was one of the ways that Texas got the reputation it has to this day, that everything's bigger in Texas, right?
Bigger and better.
Bigger and better, right? That's how Whataburger got to be so big, because when Whataburger was first started, Harmon Dobson, who created the very first one in Corpus Christi in 1950, they asked him and said, well, why is your burger so big? He said, because I wanted a burger that would be so good and so big that it would take two hands to hold it. And with one bite, you would say, what a burger. And so there's an example of a story. That's an origin story from Whataburger, but it's part of the corporate lore.
Let me go back to the story of that we chose of chess and physics, because sometimes when I ask you what's important about Brazosport College, what is it? What's the story? What are you trying to communicate? Who are your students? What is your mission? I found that people didn't know where South Texas was. And when they did learn, they thought, oh, they're on the border. It's dangerous down there. Everybody packs a gun and sells drugs. So they had the wrong story about us. And I knew it. I knew when I walked up, they didn't see what I was trying to communicate at first. They saw, somebody else. At any rate, they had their own preconceived notions. I had to change the story in their head. And when we started chess in the Valley, and I say we because I didn't start chess, obviously, but we started at the university to top off what was going on in the elementary school and junior high. I wanted it because it was so powerful, a change of story. So we changed the paradigm. I wanted people to change the way they thought about people in South Texas. Never again would they underestimate the kids in South Texas. Physics, the same thing. If they can do physics, we have now, I think, 24 physicists.
Yeah.
We are offering a PhD in physics on our campus
I
today.
remember when that started.
I mean,
remember it was-
people were saying, why physics? And it's like, well, because it's like chess.
I will never forget, Dr. Garcia. So you had tasked me to start that chess program. This was way back in the day.
Imagine.
And I'll never forget that the young man, Eric Vallarino,
Yes.
walks into my office. I remember it so vividly. He was wearing green pants and a yellow shirt tucked in. And he had these glasses, it was the archetype of a chess player. And he says, Dr. Garcia sent me over here, and she says that you're gonna help me start this chess club. I said, I guess we are. That's what we're gonna do. But I also remember something, Dr. Garcia. We were in a meeting. It was a large meeting. I don't know if it was college council or something else that was going on. And someone, it's not that they questioned the validity of having a chess program. It was, why are we investing dollars in this? And I'll never forget, because you had talked about this messaging of why it's important. But you also said, and I'll never forget this, because again, the argument stopped. It wasn't an argument, but the case against it stopped when you said, because really smart people play chess, and our kids can do it with the best of them. That was that minute at the mic. That person, I don't remember who asked the question, but that person sat back down. But you said, because really smart people play chess, and our kids can hang with the best of them.
And what we wanted to communicate was not about chess. Really,
Yeah.
It was that if that is the assumption that people make about winning in chess, which it is,
Yeah.
must be really smart
really
people,
smart
right?
people.
If they're really smart people in the valley, then they can do chess, they can do physics, they can do law, they can do medicine. What I wanted was for them to change the view of what was our core, what was possible, because if they couldn't see it, if they couldn't imagine it even. No, esos, pobrecitos, those
Yeah.
poor people that they're made low to the ground so they can pick the crops.
Yeah.
no.
I mean, horrible, horrible things, right?
Yeah, the stereotypes.
That was the
Yeah.
stereotype. Our Chamber of Commerce, Vince, at one point would advertise low wages. What does that mean? It means that 80% of the people in our community were getting paid low wages. That was a way to attract business.
Wow.
Build your company here because we can come here and have a lot of labor at low wages. The opposite of what we were trying to do in the college. So we needed to change the paradigm. And so goes back to why chess and why physics, because it ran so counterintuitive to what people thought was the potential of the people in South Texas. And once they got it, and I remember telling the story in D.C. or wherever I was, and they'd look at me like they didn't believe it.
Yeah.
And I'd say, here's the website for the chess kids, championship kids on the National, Scholastic Chess Association it was. And I said, go check out who wins the most. And we were always in the top 5, the kids, thousands of kids, always winning, elementary, junior high, high school. I mean, what was that about? Well, they didn't know they couldn't learn.
They didn't know that they
didn't
couldn't
know
do
they
it.
were not
That's right.
smart. They knew their own potential.
Yeah.
So you have to, I guess, for us, the reason chess was so important, and I knew we didn't have money at the time to start a chess program. I mean, people were furious that we hired our Russian chess coach.
Yes,
Lord
I
have mercy.
remember that.
We got better at that too.
Yes, we did.
And it's our chess coach, by the way, that is still winning at UT.
Oh, yeah.
RGB. He's
So
still there.
For the viewing audience, that program went from that startup to one of the best, and still one of the best, chess programs at the university level in the country. So
We beat Harvard. We beat Princeton. We've beat them all.
I remember
And
the first time I called, I said, Dr. Garcia, we beat Harvard. They're like, that's a win. We don't have to win the tournament, but as long as we beat Harvard on the board, it was amazing.
And we beat Princeton at
was
Princeton.
amazing.
I remember.
There was also another real powerful chess story that I never forgot, Dr. Garcia. It was the little girl that had the cannon. Do you remember that? That we were all so impressed with her because the little girl sits down, the board, and you know how it's all very structured, and they got the timer. And the little girl, she sat down. She won this before she even got on that mat on the board. She put the cannon and she faced the opponent. A little cannon. It was like a die-cast tool. I'll never forget. She put it up there, and then every time she was going to take a piece, she would point the cannon at the piece. About the 4th or 5th move, the little boy started crying, and he just threw it. He slammed the thing, and she knew she had him from the get-go. But she played the game, right? She understood the strategy. She knew that before she got there, she was, I don't know, she must have been 7 or 8.
Yeah.
But she understood
Psychological
that's
warfare
right.
is what she understood.
Somebody had coached
She
her up
psyched
really,
him
The
out.
really
first
well.
line when you get on to do the online chess, you're trying to learn what it is, because I had to learn how to play
Yeah.
chess because I was
We all
talking
did,
about
yeah.
it so much. So I asked the coaches which one I should buy. I bought the software, and the first thing it says is "Welcome to chess." Game of war, and I thought, "Oh my God, why
You're
are
like,
we
what
gonna
have I
be-
done?"
Yes, yeah, what have I done? Because right, you got to
Yeah.
win the war, and so one small note, I was in Brazil on a trip for Ford Foundation years later, right? And our prowess in chess was now renowned.
Yeah.
And I met a lady, and they said, "This is Juliet Garcia from UT Brownsville," and she looked at me. And she said, "With the chess team." And I hadn't said a word, right? And I said, "Well, yes, everybody plays chess in Brownsville." And she said, "My son goes to a little private school in New York City.
Yes.
And if he comes up against a Brownsville kid, he loses automatically. I can't play the game. I can't play," because he was so intimidated
The
by
reputation they got
by
now.
the reputation of it. Okay, that's changing the paradigm, right?
That is.
Yes.
That's saying it's possible here. Not only is it possible to win at chess locally, statewide. And I would tell people, and Texas is a big state. If we can win in Texas, we can win in D.C.
But I think there were some other real significant wins, Dr. Garcia, that came out of that program. And I have a follow leadership question regarding making difficult decisions, right? Knowing that that's the path you're going to go down. But there was one, because I was working with those young men and women day to day, and you knew you were dealing with really smart kids, right? But they also needed to absorb the world that they lived in, right? Because they experienced it differently than others. And one of the young men, I'll never forget, he comes in and he tells me, he goes, "Doc," he says, this young lady that I want to ask out. And I said, "Well," I said, "I don't know what I can tell you about this." I said, I didn't want to steer him. So he tells me who he wants to ask. I said, "And you couldn't maybe go a little," he wanted the prettiest girl on campus. You couldn't, I said, "For your first at bat, let's," he goes, "No," he goes, "I've learned on the board that if I'm going to do," he goes, "I have to be audacious in the game." He goes, "What's the worst that can happen?" I said, "She could shatter you, I said, "She could just, destroy your dreams." And he goes, "Well, I'm going to ask her." I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, let me know how it goes." I was anticipating that things are going to go terribly wrong. They ended up getting married.
That's a great story.
Yes, it was
I didn't
amazing.
know that.
Oh, yes, it was
Oh, my
amazing. So
goodness.
when he told me, when he told me who it was, I said, let's dial it back a little bit. I said, "You're going," he goes, "No," he goes, "You have to be audacious on the board." He goes, "You have to," I said, "Okay, well, you let me know how that goes," and worked out really well for him. But I guess to your point, to both of you, when you're having to make these difficult decisions, right? These are big, life-altering decisions. That young man would have never, not only not gone to school because he was not a U.S. citizen, right? So he got all that taken care of. He got that all squared away. But scholarship, right, allowed him to go because mom and dad didn't have the resources to go. But because he could play chess, he got this scholarship, changed his life. I've seen, and I keep up with them because they call me not all the time, but at least once a month, and they still keep up. But now he's got kids, married. He's got that American dream, and all of that happened because someone, in this case, Dr. Garcia and her cabinet, said, "Hey, we're going to do A, B, or C." And that changed the trajectory of so many of those students. Nellie, you remember Nellie? She
Yes,
went on to
of
be a
course.
medical doctor. It was just, I'll tell you another, just a sidebar.
We need to follow up.
Oh
We
yeah,
need to do
she's
this
amazing.
and put them
I
all
was
together.
in a cavern in Mexico somewhere. My buddy took me on these adventures, and we're down in this massive cavern. I don't even know where I was at. I was in the interior of
in
Mexico.
Oaxaca?
I have no idea, Doc. It was so long ago, but I remember all I hear is Dr. Solis. I'm looking around. It was Nellie and her family.
Oh, my.
They were in that
my.
cavern. But that young lady was so impressive. It was the same thing. She got a scholarship. She worked really, really hard on her academics, goes on to become a doctor. That program changed the lives of many. And I guess going back to the leadership piece, how do you make those difficult decisions, Dr. Garcia, in terms of, as a leader, it's going to weigh emotionally, intellectually. You would always stress, minimize the risk of failure, right? Because people are counting on you to get this right. So how do you do that as a leader in terms of the the moxie to go out and do it? How do you walk through that process for the folks that are
I
listening?
remember when I was in the executive council, I don't know if it continued after that, but for a few years, we used to have, spend an hour or so under a title that we called Tough Choices. We'd talk about the challenges before us and the tough choices that had to be made and why we would make one over another and why in some cases we take the tough choice even though it was going to cost us, to do the courageous, the audacious thing. And that was very useful exercise for us there, was to admit that we had tough choices before us, to admit that there wasn't a perfect solution, because sometimes life doesn't give you perfect solutions. All you can do is the best you can do. So do you remember that when we used to do that?
Yeah, I do. No, I do. I was thinking about the kind of audacious choice and how you learn to do that. And it's not because it works all the time, because it doesn't. And it's not because you don't have naysayers.
Right.
Because we had lots of other needs. One more English faculty member instead of a chess coach. Why are you doing it? We don't have enough money to hire good people right now, and you're hiring a chess coach.
Yeah.
So we were up against great odds, and we didn't have money to prepare the boys well, and in those days, just only boys, and so there was lots of reasons not to do it. But I guess finally, once it was like when we passed the first bond issue, we did it the first year I was president. Who does that? I remember going back to Southern Association for a meeting with the president, the boys, and I said, I won't be back to the December meeting of SACS because we have a bond issue in December. And they said, you're doing a bond issue in your first year of president. We'll never see you again.
Yeah.
Forget the next meeting. And so sometimes sometimes innocence and naivete are actually not so, you have to kind of go with what you have at the time. But here I think is what the result is. And the only word I can think to use to describe it is momentum. Once you build that momentum on a campus, there's no stopping you. Because the next one, it's like, well, we bet on that other. Remember, they're not thinking it out loud. They're not saying it. But they know that they went for a little risky deal with you down one road. And the next one, okay, we're going to try it again because it may not work, but when I ask people what they miss, former VPs, I asked Wayne Moore one day, what do you miss? And he said, well, I can tell you what I don't miss. And he started giving me all the negatives of what I don't miss the audits. I don't miss this.
Yeah.
And he said, but I miss the rush. I miss you walking in and saying, okay, we have a problem, a new Goliath, and we've got to figure our way out of this one. And he said, and then we'd all figure it out. Everybody develop a strategy. Then we'd all be sent out from our vantage point to slay
But I
the
think
dog.
to your to testament to your leadership, Dr. Garcia, was the people you surrounded with. They were all amazing. It was you. You had. I remember Vice President Moore. Again, I remember a lot of things.
He was
about
an English teacher.
Yeah, he was an English teacher,
but he became everything
I
else.
remember that he talked about what was difficult about leadership, and he says, "Well, he goes, I love to race cars. Remember that?" And he says, and one day I'm going to this one trip that I had planned, and I had done this, and then he talks about, well, then the president called me, and I had to come back, but he wasn't pouting about.
He didn't talk to me for 2 months after that.
But he understood why.
He got it.
He understood why it was so important that, hey, this comes secondary to this because this is the role I have chosen. I have to tell people, if you want to sit in the seat, it comes with some sacrifices, right? And it's not about the title, the prestige, the pay. It's you have an opportunity to be at the table where decisions are being made about the people that you serve. And if we can stay focused on that, and that was one of those big learning moments, if you stay focused on those things that are important. I remember him talking about that vividly. He says, he goes, I was upset, but once I stayed focused on why I needed to be back, right? So I think part of that leadership lesson that I learned from watching both of you was surround yourself with really good people.
People also, the other characteristic that is so important that Wayne had is truthfulness.
Yeah.
Wayne told me one time, you wanted to hire this guy and you were really high on him, and I kind of went along with you, but I didn't really think he was the right person. But you really wanted him so badly, and I didn't want you to be disappointed. And he was the wrong guy.
Yeah.
He said, you've hired me to tell you the truth. I'll never not tell you the truth again. You can get mad at me. You can not talk to me. He said, but I'll always be your truth teller.
Yeah.
Well, that's so powerful.
It's so powerful and needed by leaders, Dr.
Yeah.
Garcia. It's also difficult decisions. I remember also, Dr. Garcia, there was a couple of instances where watching the leadership from afar, remember when you had instituted that whenever we brought individuals to campus, there was an ambassador. There was somebody that would walk them around, get them to places, talk, what they knew about the institution. I got to do that twice. And on one of them, I only heard this as an urban legend, so I've never had a chance to ask you about this. But so I sat down, and then quickly, this interview with you ended very quickly. I think it was because I think you had asked the question, what interests you about the position at our institution? And I'm paraphrasing from what I had heard in this urban legend. I don't know if it happened, but it said something to the effect of, well, beggars can't be choosers. And at that point, the interview ended for that individual.
kidding.
And I said, and so I said, because of all the people that you could have said that to, I said, you said it to but you were right. You were absolutely right. There was another one who we were walking around and I'll never forget, he goes, hey, he says, I'd like to go back to the hotel and take a nap. And this was like 2:00 in the afternoon. I'm like, well, I'm going to have to call Dr. Silva in this case, who I know was going to call you. So Dr. Silva calls me back. He goes, absolutely, take him back to the hotel, and he's done for the day. So I said, all right. So there's sometimes you have to make these calls, right? Because it's just not going to be a fit for what you're working on and what the vision is as a
You
leader.
remember Dr. Colom, Luis Colom?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant, MD, PhD.
Yeah.
He was
very
at the
smart.
Baylor School of Medicine when we recruited him. Why would anyone come to start a program in biomedical research? So Jose Martin was recruiting him and called me up on a Christmas break time, and he says, you got to take this call with this guy I'm trying to recruit from Baylor. And I said, okay, tell me a little bit about Dr. Colom. And he told me everything. I said, boy, this is really, this is going to be tough. And he goes, no, I know you can talk. If you talk to him, you'll get him. So sure enough, we got him to come and visit. So he comes to campus and he's looking for his labs. We didn't have labs. Wow. And so Jose and I said, well, if you see this wing right here, it's going to be a lab. It was the janitor's closet in the Life and Health Sciences building. That became Luis Colom's first lab. We took the janitors out. We made him a lab. I said, okay, from here on out, now you have to bring us money so we can build the labs. He said, I'm building the whole program. I said, yes, we had nothing. Yeah. So you had to be willing to come and build a program, not where's my fancy office going to be? Am I going to have a big window? And what's my travel budget?
Yeah.
It was not that at all. It was quite the opposite. It was come because you believe in our work, and with nothing, you're going to build a program. You are going to be the builder of a program. You're not inheriting one or expanding one. And so you had to remember the story of the Peace Corps workers. All of a sudden, one day around the table, somebody said, have you noticed we have a lot of former Peace Corps people on our campus? And then someone said, yeah, I know so-and-so. They were in the Peace Corps. And so we decided to see just how many we had. And we asked them invited them to go to, what is the name of the little restaurant? Across from Madeira on that Resaca off of Central. At any rate, it was a little cafe restaurant there. And we said, we'll meet you there at 5:00 on Friday afternoon. If you were in the Peace Corps, please join us so we can kind of talk and get to know each other. I mean, we had over 50 people show up for the event.
The other thing that we had on campus, Dr. Garcia, and I don't know how, there was a whole bunch of Eagle Scouts.
Okay, I mean, that's a perfect.
We had a whole bunch. I remember there was an office, and I'll never forget, because it was just, you would walk in that office, and it was immaculate. And I remember asking, I said, there were all guys in there. I said, why is this office, this feels odd in here?
Yeah.
And then Scooby Garza.
Oh, yes.
God-given name, right? Scooby
Yes.
Eusebio. He says, they're all Eagle Scouts. I said, really? He goes, every single one of them are Eagles. At that time, for whatever reason, there was 5 or 6 of them. And so between, I guess, the Peace Corps and all these Eagle Scouts on campus.
They're do-gooders.
Yeah.
They're people that follow the rules, that want to do good, that make a difference, work harder, get paid nothing for being an Eagle Scout.
I always thought that was fascinating. Yeah,
I was an Eagle Scout.
Well, there was another one.
Okay, see, I didn't know that.
We are about to, See, I didn't know that
Oh.
either. So we're going to wrap up.
Well,
but
makes sense.
we have reached the end of our podcast, Dr. Garcia, Dr. Strong. I want to thank you so much for spending time to share your wisdom, your vision, your many years of experience as amazing leaders. Yeah, I often tell folks, as I mentioned earlier, I said, you don't understand. I said, I work for one of the best presidents in the entire country. And then when I tell them, I said, yeah, she was sandwiched in between Obama and the Pope. I said, Force magazine. So,
They go share it.
yeah, but I'm very proud of it because it was a leadership learning class, to Dr. Strong point, every day, every time that we got to interact with you. So I just want to thank you for not just what you've done and accomplished and all the people that you serve, same with you, Dr. Strong, everything that you guys put together there, but for pouring of yourselves, because leadership is about you give so much of your life up to make it happen for someone else. And I think testament to passion and purpose, really important, and understanding why you're entrusted, to your point, Dr. Zia, with the roles that we have. So thank you so much for making your trip to Houston, then south of Houston to Lake Jackson and to our institution. We are looking forward to a couple of days of you visiting and getting to know us. And we want to thank you again for not just taking time to be out here, but everything you've done in your roles as leaders.
Glad
It's a
to be here.
privilege to
Thanks for
see you
inviting me.
too.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you so much, folks. We'll be back with our next podcast, which is going to include a visit with our very own local state rep, Cody Vasut. Until next time, enjoy the show and join us here at Brazosport College for all things educational and higher education, and this year, leadership. Thank you for being a part of the podcast.